Coming up on Arirang News, Japan announces new restrictions on exports to Korea of key materials for making high-tech displays and computer chips. The move is in retaliation for South Korean courts ordering Japanese companies to compensate the Koreans they forced to work for them during World War II. South Korea's exports were down in June for a 7th straight month. Fallout from the U.S.-China trade war, but also continued weakness in the price of semiconductors. And U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says he expects new talks with North Korea to start around the middle of this month. He says he thinks yesterday's historic meeting at the DMZ opened a way forward on denuclearization. It's 4:00 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on our afternoon newscast. I'm Devin Whiting. Secretary of State Pompeo remarked yesterday after President Trump and Chairman Kim met at the DMZ that he thinks this time Pyongyang and Washington have a way forward on denuclearization. New talks between the two sides, he says, will start this month. Won Jung-hwan has more.
Right after what was essentially a third bilateral summit with North Korean leader Kim Jongun at the Freedom House on Sunday, President Trump said lower-level talks of some kind will begin soon.
What's going to happen is over the next 2 or 3 weeks, the teams are going to start working to see whether or not they can do something. Very big stuff, pretty complicated, but not as complicated as people think.
Trump said he hopes the U.S. and North Korea can reach what he called a comprehensive deal, reiterating that speed is not the object. The new talks, he said, will be led by U.S. nuclear envoy Stephen Biegun and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Just after President Trump's announcement, Pompeo confirmed he expects denuclearization negotiations with North Korea to resume in mid-July. Pompeo said he is excited about getting back to the negotiating table, which he thinks has a clear path forward this time.
Maybe I said it from the podium a few weeks back, we thought there might be this opportunity, and the president, by getting together with Chairman Kim today, broke through and was able to get us the opportunity to get back to the negotiating table. We think we do have a jumping-off point for these discussions, which will put us in a place where we can truly evaluate if there's a clear path forward. Having listened to Chairman Kim today, I think there is.
Without elaborating much other than saying one of a couple people regarding the lineup of the members, he explained the U.S. negotiating team will be led by Special Representative for North Korea Stephen Biegun, which the North Koreans will be led by officials from the Foreign Ministry, just like the working level meeting which took place before Trump met Kim. There is speculation Vice Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee will take charge. Amid reports, Kim Yong-chul and Kim Hyok-chul, the two top negotiators for the Hanoi summit, were punished for the lack of a deal in Vietnam. The breakdown was caused by a difference between U.S. demands for complete denuclearization and North Korea's demands for sanctions relief. But this time, following the abrupt but historic meeting at Panmunjom on Sunday, the working-level members are confident negotiations will bring somewhat fruitful results. Won Jung-hwan, Arirang News.
North Korea's state media are calling the historic handshake between Kim Jongun and Donald Trump an amazing event and a breakthrough in denuclearization efforts. The Korean Central News Agency on Monday highlighted the friendly exchange, quoting Kim as saying their ties would continue producing, quote, good and unpredictable results. It said the leaders discussed the easing of tensions on the Korean peninsula, ending hostilities between North Korea and the U.S., and issues of mutual concern that hindered progress in the past. It also reported on the impromptu nature of the meeting, quoting Kim, who said his friendly relationship with Trump had allowed the sudden meetup to take place. Now, President Trump's proposal of a meeting with Kim Jong-un came at the very last minute on Twitter. The North Korean leader is not known for spontaneity in his diplomacy, so what made him agree to go? Our Oh Jung-hee explains.
North Korean leader Kim Jong-un was only one tweet away from U.S. President Donald Trump. Saying the surprise handshake meeting at the inter-Korean truce village of Panmunjom was not pre-organized, Kim said.
미리 사전에 합의된 만남이 아닌가 이런 말들도 하던데 나 역시 깜짝 놀랐고 정식으로 오늘 여기서 만날 걸 제안하시는 말씀을 오후 늦은 시간에야 이렇게 알게 됐습니다.
It was a last-minute impromptu suggestion from President Trump via Twitter to meet at the demilitarized zone. But despite that, Kim decided to head south to Panmunjom with his closest aides. Accompanying him were the North's Minister and Vice Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lee Yong-ho and Choi Sun-hee, the core figures in the North's denuclearization talks with the U.S. Also spotted at Panmunjom were Kim Yo-jong, Kim Jong-un's sister, Kim Chang-sun, the chief secretary, and Kim's closest aides, Do Yong-won from the ruling party's Organization and Guidance Department, and Hyun Song-wol, now in charge of protocol. Some watchers say Kim Jong-un could have taken this as an opportunity to show North Korean citizens his status as a proud leader meeting the U.S. president upon Washington's request. But at the same time, there are also views Kim took the handshake encounter seriously as an opportunity to seek a breakthrough in the stalled nuclear negotiations. By highlighting his relationship with President Trump, Kim clearly showed Pyongyang wants to continue talking with U.S. rather than return to hostilities. Fresh momentum for dialogue was created between Pyongyang and Washington through Kim and Trump's historic encounter at Panmunjom. And it's notable how this momentum was revived by the interaction between the top leaders themselves rather than between working-level officials, coming after their recent exchange of friendly letters. 오정희, Arirang News.
Now, Trump's latest meeting with Kim Jong-un clearly has implications for the denuclearization process and peace on the Korean peninsula, but it may also have effects for Trump back home. Some say it was a move to fire up his base and win over some independent voters ahead of the 2020 election. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
President Trump stepped out of Marine One at Osan Air Base to cheers on Sunday evening as he walked toward the podium to address hundreds of U.S. troops stationed in South Korea. With a satisfied smile, Trump encouraged the U.S. soldiers, while stressing his surprise meeting with Kim Jong-un at the DMZ was very productive.
We had a very productive meeting. I outlined the incredible prosperity that awaits North Korea when this whole thing gets settled.
He also called up to the stage both Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his daughter Ivanka.
What a beautiful couple. Mike, Beauty and the Beast, Mike.
President Trump even gave shout-outs to a handful of soldiers as well as Robert Abrams, commander of U.S. Forces Korea. Soon the ambience of the Osan Air Base reminded many of the election campaign that led to Trump's victory in 2016.
Where is he? And you know that great Abrams tank is in his family, named after his father. Did you know that? It's pretty impressive.
As President Trump has formally launched his 2020 re-election campaign, many analysts say his surprise DMZ encounter with the North's leader is aimed at winning over the hearts of American voters. Trump even won praise from news media outlets that are usually critical of the U.S. president, including CNN, which said the trip and meeting had gone well. On the other hand, there were also criticisms that the DMZ encounter helped elevate Kim Jong-un's status. Victor Cha, the Korea chair at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, said the DMZ meeting was nothing more than a reality TV show that legitimizes Kim in the eyes of the North Korean people. Cha added it will remain a theatrical show if it does not lead to concrete and substantive denuclearization talks going forward. Kim Hyo-sun, Arirang News.
The U.S. and China may have called a truce in their trade war, but another one might be about to start, this one between South Korea and Japan. EG1 has this story.
The Japanese government has taken economic retaliation against South Korea for its ruling over compensation for forced labor. Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry announced Monday that starting Thursday, it'll tighten restrictions on the export of high-tech material used in smartphones and chips to South Korea. The three restricted items are fluorine polyamide, which is used as a liquid crystal display component in TVs and smartphones, and resist and etching gas used for manufacturing semiconductors. According to Kyodo News Agency, the ministry said the move comes as trust between the two sides has broken down. This is the first time Tokyo has imposed actual sanctions measures on Seoul after threatening to take such actions on numerous occasions. This comes as Seoul's Supreme Court last year ordered Japanese companies, Nippon Steel and Sumitomo Metal Corporation, and Mitsubishi Heavy Industries to compensate South Korean victims of forced labor during its colonization under Japan. While Japan had been insisting that it had already paid compensation when the two sides normalized their ties in 1965, Seoul's top court said the bilateral agreement between the governments does not take away individuals' rights to reparations. After months without action from the Japanese side, Seoul's top court froze the Japanese firm's assets within South Korea, but has not yet started selling off those assets. While the sanctions are expected to take their toll on South Korean tech firms, Seoul's Foreign Affairs Minister Kang Kyung-hwa said at the National Assembly last month that Seoul will not just sit and watch if Japan takes retaliatory measures on Seoul against a forced labor ruling. Though Kang said she made those comments in order to prevent the situation from getting worse, Japan's latest move is expected to further increase the tension between the two sides. Lee Ji-won, Arirang News.
Now, Korean government ministries are responding quickly to these measures from Tokyo, but still there are concerns that they will hurt the business of some of Korea's biggest tech companies. Our Ko Ryun-hee takes a closer look.
South Korea's finance chief Hong Nam-ki held a meeting with related ministries on Monday to discuss possible countermeasures to Tokyo's planned export restrictions on Seoul. And Trade Minister Song Yun-mo will discuss the details of Japan's move in the Trade Ministry's meeting this afternoon. Because Japan's planned restrictions will cover high-tech items necessary for manufacturing semiconductors, there are concerns over whether the restrictions will impact Korea's chip exports, which accounted for 1/5 of the country's total exports in 2018. Two of the three items announced by Japan are related to semiconductor manufacture. One is called resist, the thin layer used to transfer circuit pattern to the semiconductor substrate. The planned export restriction is likely to affect tech giants like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix because Japan accounts for about 90% of the global production of the item. The other is etching gas, and Japan produces around 70% of total global supply. One other item, called fluorinated polyamide, is used for making displays used in Samsung and LG smartphones. And Japan accounts for about 90% of the global supply of this too. Some analysts are downplaying the possible impact on the local economy. According to an analyst from KTB Investment and Securities, the restrictions will persuade the tech giants to find suppliers in Korea, which will benefit local companies making related materials. However, it may not be that easy to find other firms capable of making the materials at a low enough price.
The reason why Korea didn't look for markets other than Japan is because of cost and technology. Japanese firms like Toshiba and Sharp are among the most powerful companies in the world that are capable of producing items with that level of technology at the current cost. So it is good to solve this trade conflict diplomatically.
Industry sources say Korea's tech giants are paying sharp attention to the matter and planning to work with the government to find possible countermeasures. Ko Ryun-hee, Arirang News.
It's time now for a look at the market action on this Monday, and for that I'm joined by Dr. Hwang Se-eun, Research Fellow at the Korea Capital Market Institute. Dr. Hwang, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for inviting me today.
So we start the week with some more turbulence on the trade front. As we just heard, Japan will be restricting its exports to Korea of high-tech materials used in displays and semiconductors. What does this mean for Korea and Korean companies?
South Korean chip and display makers are expected to embrace yet more uncertainty from Japan's restriction of exports of key materials for their production amid diplomatic rows between the two nations. The Japanese export restriction is adding another burden to Korean tech firms, which have been in an awkward situation over the U.S. ban on Huawei, a major client of memory chips. As it could take about 90 days for Japanese companies to gain approval for their exports for the materials, major chip and display producers will have to find alternative sources to maintain a stable level of stockpiles after the current contract expires. While the new rule means a more complicated process not an export ban on the materials, the rule may constrict production activities for a while. Japan's new measure could affect production process of Korean chip and display makers in the short run, but it could benefit them in the mid and long term. As memory chip and display companies are currently grappling with the supply glut, local manufacturers could clear out the stockpiles and could leverage their bargaining power over Japanese companies later.
Yeah, that's an interesting possibility. Well, in another trade conflict at the G20 last week, President Trump and Xi Jinping agreed to a truce. How have markets responded to that, and what do you see in their deal?
The Osaka truce has reduced the possibility of tension escalation in the near term, and the results slightly exceeded market expectations. Though there's a lack of detail over the next steps for U.S.-China talks, many were surprised by Trump's decision to allow Huawei to buy some products from U.S. suppliers. Stocks rallied and bond retreated on Monday as a thaw in Sino-U.S. trade dispute tempered the risk to the global economy. However, I don't think the likelihood of a deal has necessarily increased. It is probably in the best interest of both parties to keep the talks running as long as they can. It is still unclear where the talks might go.
Yeah, well, now it's July 1st, so we're in the second half of 2019. What's the outlook for the global economy for the rest of the year? Are there any particular things we need to watch?
In the second half of year 2019, I expect the global and local economic slowdown to continue steadily if the U.S.-China trade dispute does not make a dramatic progress, and the uncertainty in this frontier is still pretty high. The U.S.-China trade talks are one of the most important events in the second half of 2019. Even after agreeing to resume trade talks with China, President Trump said no timeline existed for reaching a deal and suggested that the two sides remained as far apart as they were when talks broke up in May. The number of the rate cuts by the Federal Reserve and their timing are another important events to watch carefully. The rate cuts by the Fed will improve investors' sentiment, while they can put more pressure on the major central banks.
All right, Dr. Huang, that's where we'll have to leave it today. Thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
Now, data show South Korea's exports declined in June for a seventh month in a row. Korea again caught in the trade war between the U.S. and China, and prices of semiconductors continuing to fall. Kim Dami has the details.
The outlook is gloomy for South Korea's exports, with the latest data showing outbound shipments have fallen for the seventh consecutive month in June.
South Korea's total exports were around $44.2 billion last month. Imports also fell by more than 8% on year to around $40 billion.
That's down more than 13% compared to the same period last year, and is the largest on-year drop in the past 3 years and 5 months since a 19.6% fall in January 2016. The ministry attributed June's fall in exports to the worsening trade dispute between the U.S. and China, as well as falling semiconductor prices.
It's a relief that the U.S. and China agreed last week to resume their trade talks, but that doesn't mean Korea's exports will turn around right away. Instead, Korea needs to increase its competitiveness in exports by developing its own advanced technologies.
Automobile and shipbuilding exports rose, but outbound shipments of semiconductors and petrochemical goods fell sharply by around 25% and 24% respectively. As of the end of June, prices of semiconductors had dropped by 33% compared to the previous year. Exports to China, Korea's #1 trading partner, went down by 24%, the biggest on-year decline in 10 years. To cope with the sluggish exports, the government aims to boost trade finance to $102 billion in the second part of the year, pouring in around $60 billion in the third quarter. And to help diversify the country's exports, the government will announce export innovation measures in July. Kim Dami, Arirang News.
For those who like shopping, Arirang TV will soon be helping uncover hidden gems like the ones you'd find at Korean shops by featuring high-quality products made by up-and-coming firms. Arirang TV's president, Lee Seung-yeol, signed an MOU on Monday with Gongyoung Shop, which runs a TV shopping channel. Arirang will be helping small and medium companies go global. Here's the Korean Minister of Small Business and Startups, who was at the signing.
Today's MOU is the first step to achieving co-prosperity and coexistence in the market. One of the most difficult hurdles for venture firms is securing a market presence, especially overseas, so there is a need for this sort of synergy.
The two sides will work together to create eye-catching content that gives a platform to small and medium firms in Korea so they can showcase and sell innovative products overseas. The presidents of Arirang TV and Gongyoung Shop see lots of potential for the project. Here they are earlier today.
We will do our best to help small business owners go global and expand their business network overseas. This is not about talk, but rather practical results, which we will deliver.
SMEs had no avenue to enter overseas markets. By creating excellent Korean products, which are growing in popularity along with the rise of K-beauty and K-pop, I believe there's a huge market potential through synergy with Arirang TV.
Gongyoung Shop has a user base of 8 million people. It helps small and medium firms build a market presence and provides them with a channel to sell their products online. South Korea's new rule mandating a maximum 52-hour work week takes effect today for 1 million workers employed at bus companies, in finance, and at broadcasting and educational services. The shorter work week came into force a year ago for companies with more than 300 workers, but 21 sectors, including those, had been granted a one-year grace period to help them adjust. The 52-hour limit was introduced to boost productivity and consumption through flexible work hours and extra leisure time. It'll take effect for medium-sized firms next year and small businesses with fewer than 50 employees from 2021. When cooking at home, Koreans are increasingly turning to ready-to-cook meal kits. These have all the ingredients sliced, diced, and ready to go, which saves a lot of time. Park Se-young has this report.
Meal kits have made cooking a lot easier for this working mom who has to balance both work and family. Because they come with pre-measured and pre-cut ingredients, meal kits can help reduce the time and effort that goes into cooking.
Washing and cutting ingredients is a lot of work, but they are all included and pre-washed. Buying ingredients one by one leaves a lot of leftovers, but with meal kits, I like that I can cook delicious meals efficiently.
The popular cooking boxes come in a range of flavors and menus. With a variety of sauces, oils, and spices, meal kits are a popular choice for making exotic dishes for special occasions. In fact, Korea's meal kit market is expected to grow from an estimated $34.6 million in 2019 to over $600 million in the next 5 years. And with a growing number of double-income families and single-person households, major food retailers like CJ are jumping in the race.
With R&D capability like no other and based on know-how from top chefs' recipes, we will develop really tasty meals that consumers want.
At around $20 for 2 servings, meal kits don't come cheap, and cooking boxes ordered online take at least 1 day to ship. And because meal kits usually consist of fresh ingredients like meat and vegetables, they have a short shelf life. Park Se-young, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thanks for being with us. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.